Rome had warrior emperors, legendary conquerors, and political masterminds. But every now and then, the empire also produced true entertainment icons. And no one embraced that role better than Elagabalus. Forget grand military strategies and eloquent speeches in the Senate. What we have here is an emperor who turned Rome into a mix of RuPaul's Drag Race, Keeping Up with the Kardashians, and Game of Thrones. But with no script, no boundaries, and way more snakes being unleashed at parties. If you think your friend who goes overboard during carnival is too much, imagine a guy who not only ruled an empire but also wore makeup, extravagant jewelry, and threw banquets where some guests literally suffocated under mountains of flower petals. Like a VIP party, but with a mild risk of asphyxiation. Did he really offer money to doctors to turn him into a woman? How did he manage to marry a gladiator to a statue? And how did he go from supreme ruler to a garbage bag floating down the Tiber River? So get ready, because today we're diving into the insane, extravagant, and completely chaotic life of the emperor who made Caligula look like an average bureaucrat. Buckle up, or better yet, adjust your golden tunic, because this ride is about to go completely off the rails. Hey Discovers, real quick before we dive back in, I've got a small favor to ask. If you love historical curiosities, epic battles, crazy mysteries, and mind-blowing stories that most people don't know about, then hit that subscribe button right now. That way, you won't miss any of our new videos and can keep uncovering insane facts every week. And of course, smash that like button. It really helps the channel grow and brings you even more awesome content. Alright, let's jump back into history. If you thought Elagabalus was just another eccentric emperor, oh boy, you're in for a treat. Because not only did he rule Rome like a chaotic reality show contestant, he also completely ignored every gender norm of the ancient world. While most Roman emperors strutted around in military gear or classic togas, Elagabalus was out here rocking silk dresses, heavy makeup, and enough jewelry to make a modern influencer jealous. He didn't just wear women's clothing. He fully embraced the role, demanding to be called lady, and even empress at times. And if you think that's where the story ends, nope. Elagabalus took it several steps further. He not only married a man, a gladiator named Hierocles, whom he lovingly referred to as his husband, but he also actively sought out doctors who could permanently transform him into a woman. Yep, he was out there offering bags of gold to any physician who could pull off what would basically be the world's first recorded gender reassignment surgery. To put this into perspective, while most emperors were busy waging wars or debating with senators, Elagabalus was literally pioneering gender-affirming procedures nearly 2,000 years before modern medicine even caught up. Imagine if an ancient Roman had access to Instagram. Elagabalus would have been the ultimate beauty influencer, reviewing the latest kohl eyeliner trends straight from Egypt. But being an LGBTQ+ icon of the ancient world wasn't enough. Because Elagabalus also had a personal life so chaotic it made reality dating shows look boring in comparison. You think your love life is messy? Allow me to introduce you to Elagabalus, a man whose relationship history makes The Bachelor look like a well-organized tax form. Because when it came to romance, Elagabalus didn't just break the rules. He set them on fire, danced on the ashes, and then married the first person he saw. For starters, he had at least 5 marriages. And not the boring, politically motivated ones that Roman emperors usually had. Nope, Elagabalus' most famous husband was a gladiator named Hierocles, whom he not only called his husband but also insisted that he was the wife. Imagine a Roman emperor showing up to the Colosseum and instead of watching the fights, he's out there cheering for his man like a proud, supportive girlfriend. And that's just the beginning. Because when he wasn't making history as ancient Rome's first celebrity wife, he was out there literally working in brothels. Yes, you heard that right. The ruler of the Roman Empire would dress up as a prostitute, sneak into local brothels, and serve customers. According to historians, he loved it so much that he even set up a room in the palace where he could continue his side hustle, charging people to sleep with the Emperor of Rome. Peak side hustle culture. But if you think his romantic life was weird already, wait until you hear about his wedding plans. At one point, he tried to marry one of his lovers, to the goddess Venus. That's right, an actual statue of the goddess of love. Apparently, in Elagabalus' mind, a normal wedding just wouldn't cut it, so he thought, why not make this official with a literal deity? So, to recap, married a gladiator and called himself the wife. worked as a prostitute while ruling Rome, attempted to officiate the world's first man-to-statue wedding. Honestly, at this point, his love life wasn't just chaotic, it was mythological. But if you think his relationships were wild, wait until you see how he ran his palace. Rome's imperial palace was a place of political intrigue, strategic meetings, and serious governance. Well, not under Elagabalus. Because as far as he was concerned, being emperor was less about ruling an empire and more about throwing the most unhinged parties humanly possible. Imagine The Great Gatsby meets a jackass prank special, but with an unlimited imperial budget. That's what the palace of Elagabalus was like. And if you were lucky or unlucky enough to be invited to one of his infamous banquets, you had no idea if you were walking into an extravagant feast or an elaborate death trap. Let's talk about the flowers. Normally, flowers at a banquet are a nice touch, right? Well, Elagabalus took it way too far. At one party, he ordered so many rose petals to be dumped onto his guests that some of them literally suffocated to death. That's right, death by luxury. Imagine explaining that on your tombstone, died because the emperor thought flower confetti was a fun party trick. And that's not all. Sometimes, he released live snakes into the crowd just to see what would happen. Because apparently, nothing says Roman hospitality like turning your guests into unwilling contestants in a Fear Factor episode. His idea of generosity was also questionable. He loved playing reverse lotteries, where guests would sit down expecting gifts, only to have fake prizes like dead animals or invitations to execution. Which, let's be honest, makes getting socks for Christmas seem like a blessing. So let's review. Deadly flower avalanches. Snake attacks at dinner parties. Prank gifts that sometimes resulted in actual death. Truly, the man was an artist of chaos. But the madness didn't stop at his parties. Because in addition to being Rome's most insane party planner, Elagabalus also decided he needed to start his own religion. As if the cross-dressing, gladiator weddings, and murderous flower arrangements weren't enough, Elagabalus decided that ruling Rome wasn't the ultimate power move. No. What he really wanted was to become the head of his own religion. Now, Rome already had an entire pantheon of gods, but Elagabalus took one look at Jupiter, Mars, and the rest and said, "Nah, I got something better." His grand plan? A complete religious rebrand of the empire, centered around just one god, Elagabal, the sun god from his home in Syria. That's right, Rome wasn't polytheistic enough for this guy, so he just deleted all the other gods like an overconfident game modder. At the heart of this new religion was a giant black meteorite, which Elagabalus claimed was a sacred representation of the sun god. He had the massive rock transported all the way to Rome and forced senators and nobles to bow down and worship it. Imagine if a president decided that the entire country had to pray to a random chunk of space rock. That's basically what happened. But Elagabalus didn't stop there. He built a brand new super temple, called the Elagabalium, which was basically the Vatican for his new religion. He even tried to make Rome's entire population convert, replacing traditional Roman religious festivals with celebrations dedicated to his sun god. And by celebrations, I mean orgies, animal sacrifices, and feasts so wild that even Bacchus would have gone, "Dude, chill." Oh, and in one of his weirder moves, he even tried to marry his sacred rock to the goddess Minerva, as if arranging a celestial wedding was the key to legitimacy. Because, if marrying a gladiator didn't raise enough eyebrows, why not take it a step further and wed a meteorite to a deity? So, to summarize, replaced all Roman gods with his personal sun god, forced senators to worship a literal space rock, hosted religious festivals that were basically NSFW, attempted the first interdimensional marriage between a rock and a goddess. But here's the thing. Romans weren't exactly on board with this whole worship a meteor thing. And as his chaotic rule continued, patience started running thin. Because as history has shown time and time again, when an emperor gets too weird, Rome has a way of handling the situation. So, at this point, Elagabalus had dressed as a woman and demanded to be called empress, married a gladiator and worked as a prostitute while ruling an empire, killed people with flower petals for fun, replaced every Roman god with a sun-worshipping space rock cult. And somehow, it took the Romans 4 years to say, Okay, yeah, maybe this guy shouldn't be in charge. The final straw? His own grandmother, Julia Misa, who had originally helped him get on the throne, decided it was time to cut her losses. She knew that Rome was this close to a full-scale rebellion, so she pulled the oldest trick in the Roman playbook. She switched allegiances to a more acceptable replacement, Elagabalus' cousin, Severus Alexander. Meanwhile, the Praetorian Guard, the emperor's personal security force, had also had enough of the nonsense. It turns out that when your boss keeps throwing jackass-style parties, makes you worship a rock, and forces you to pretend he's a literal goddess, you start questioning your job choices. So, in the year 222 AD, when Elagabalus finally realized the tides were turning, he panicked. He ran. He tried to hide. And where does an emperor in full-blown paranoia mode decide to make his last stand? The palace bathrooms. Yep. The most extravagant, chaotic ruler of Rome ended his story hiding in a toilet. But it didn't help, because the Praetorian Guard broke in and stabbed him to death. Then, to make sure he was well and truly out of history, they beheaded him, dragged his corpse through the streets, threw his body into the Tiber River like yesterday's garbage. So, to recap, Elagabalus wanted to be a living goddess, but Rome made sure his legacy ended floating face down in a sewer. If that's not the ultimate cancellation, I don't know what is. But despite Rome's best efforts to erase him, his story still survives today, as one of the most bizarre, extravagant, and completely off-the-rails reigns in history. So, what's the final verdict on Elagabalus? Visionary LGBTQ+ icon or absolute train wreck of an emperor? Honestly, why not both? On one hand, he was so outrageously incompetent at ruling that even Caligula probably would have been like, "Dude, tone it down." He abandoned every Roman tradition, forced everyone to worship a literal rock, and threw parties so dangerous that attending one was basically a death sentence with hors d'oeuvres. His reign was so chaotic that Rome erased his name from official records. Classic, we don't claim him energy. But on the other hand, you have to admit, he was ahead of his time. He openly defied gender roles, lived as his authentic self, and pushed boundaries in a society where most emperors were too busy stabbing each other in the Senate. If he had been born in the 21st century, he'd probably be a social media sensation with millions of followers, dropping makeup tutorials and chaotic reality show confessionals. So what can we learn from Elagabalus? Maybe that history isn't just about great leaders and epic wars. Sometimes, it's about absolute agents of chaos who remind us just how weird the past could be. And now, I want to hear from you. Was Elagabalus a misunderstood pioneer or just a disaster in human form? What's the wildest part of his reign, in your opinion? And most importantly, would you survive one of his dinner parties? Drop a comment below, and if you enjoyed this deep dive into Rome's biggest hot mess, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell for more historical insanity.